Welcome everybody. It's lovely to have so many people, and do feel free to share your faces at any time, or stay behind your screens. We are going to keep everyone on mute this evening because we've got a lot of people on the call. I'm Tony Burton. I'm one of the conveners of Neighbourhood Planners.London, and we've got other conveners on in the meeting as well. Angela's going to be driving things behind, Angela Koch. We've also got Henry, Alicia and Graham who are with us as well. So, and this is an event put on by us as volunteers for the network of neighbourhood planners across the capital. It's been a popular event. We've had more interest in this event than our previous one, and that was already quite popular. So just a few housekeeping things from me. First is we will end at 7 o'clock at the latest. And if you want to take a break, just do that at any time. We're not going to have a formal break. As I said, we're going to keep everyone on mute just so we can manage the numbers, but feel free to have your screen on. And it's obviously always welcome these days to have some FaceTime with people. We're going to use the chat as the main way of raising issues and asking questions. So if you could, some people have already started, and if you could just make sure you're directing the chat to everyone, that means we know that, well, we'll see it, and also we'll know that it's something which we can raise as either as a discussion point or a question. We are going to be recording the evening. The recording is really for the presentations. We're not going to use the general chit chat in any way. And if it feels like it's worked, then we're expecting to post the recording of the presentations online at a future date, as we did with the previous meeting. We're going to just a couple of polls asking for your feedback during the discussion. And thanks to everyone for coming along and responding to the sort of call and invitation. Thanks in particular to Angela for hosting the event. It's her Zoom we're using, and we're grateful to her for that, as well as for running things smoothly as we manage the IT. The running order is I'm going to give just a brief update on sort of state of play with some things around neighbourhood planning in London. Then Nicholas Boyce-Smith will shortly be joining us.
Yes, just turned up on my screen.
Okay, and after Nicholas has spoken, there'll be a chance for questions and discussion around that. So that's when the chat will come alive. We've then got a session with 4 neighbourhood forums, volunteers from those neighbourhood forums back to back, chosen because they're forums which are approaching referendum, and they've had their examination, so there's nothing standing in their way apart from a popular vote. And at that stage there'll also be, if time allows, opportunities for feedback and discussion. So that brings me to the update. And though in fact we have a growing number of groups sort of waiting to get to referendum stage, because whatever else has been going on in the world, whether it be in the planning world with changes to planning policy and a planning white paper, or the wider impact on all of us of the pandemic, there's no question that neighbourhood planning in London hasn't stood still. And it continues to be both alive and kicking and moving forward, although clearly affected in all sorts of different ways. We've got over 70 active neighbourhood forums across the capital. New neighbourhood forums are still coming in, new applications to set them up. We've recently had one in Wimbledon, which would be the first one in Merton, which is one of the boroughs which hasn't had any. There are at least 9 by our count, but tell us if we've got it wrong, plans which are through the process post-examination and awaiting referendum, and there's a few more that are going to examination quite soon. There's a large number of forums that are renewing their 5-year term, although we're aware of at least 11 forums whose time has lapsed and they've chosen or they've not been able to renew their term. We now have a London plan in force, which is clearly important as it's a critical consideration when we get to the basic conditions. It's quite a detailed London plan, but it's also a London plan that agrees that neighbourhood planning provides, and I quote, a particularly good opportunity for communities to shape growth in their area. And we've just recently had agreement from the GLA to host a neighbourhood planning event in partnership with us and with London councils, details of which and timing of which has all to be worked out, but expect something to move forward in due course, certainly after the mayoral elections around that. There are, as we all know, certain headwinds. It's not always as easy as it might be to be a neighbourhood planner in London. Following Henry Peterson's detailed research, we published the report on the designation process for neighbourhood forums and boundaries of areas a few weeks ago, showing it's quite hard to get going and some of the reasons why it's hard to get going. It's still taking too long to get from designation to examination for many forums, and there are concerns over the level of support. And clearly there are uncertainties which are stemming from the planning white paper and what that means for the future of neighbourhood planning more generally. So we will be drawing over the next few weeks together our next sort of state of neighbourhood planning report. We did one back in 2019. That was the first one. We didn't do one last year for obvious reasons, and we're going to take stock over the next few weeks and pull the key sort of elements together. So if anyone's got any thoughts on what we might cover in that, we'll share sort of draft thoughts when we've produced them. But if anyone's got any early thoughts on that, then do let us know either separately in the chat today, by email, or later. And there is also some positive news. Ministers have clearly said that they want to give neighbourhood planning more breadth. The planning white paper has clearly said it wants to spread the use of neighbourhood planning further, to have more of it, particularly in towns and cities. And the government's been giving strong backing to both design and early community engagement, which will bring us to the next part of the agenda. But before we get there, we just wanted to conduct a short poll. Angela, if you could share that, just to understand people's appetite for some of the key tools that are being talked about when it comes to design and neighbourhood planning. So with the right level of support, would you consider including a set of design rules or a design code in your neighbourhood plan, either now or in the future? And you've got 4 options there. So if you wouldn't mind just spending a few seconds having a go at that. Or I suppose I could do it myself as well.
You have now 60% of you have voted already. So, and catching nearly 80 now.
The suspense is killing me, Angela.
Have you managed to vote?
I've voted.
Good. So it's at 85% now. Another 5 seconds. Don't forget to actually press submit. That's quite important in this one. I'd love to have 90% on this. I guess people who probably are out and about, like Alicia, walking Hampstead Heath, probably got a bit of a technical challenge there. 1% more, one more vote, I think, and then we're good, and we stop the poll. I haven't voted because I can't. I haven't my laptop on. 90%, wonderful. So 75 of you, of all 83 on the call, have voted, and I shall end our poll now, and I shall share the results. Isn't that exciting? Here we are. So 40 or 53% of you have voted yes, likely. 25 of you, or 33%, possibly. And only, I may say, 5 of you have voted, or 7% no, unlikely. And an astonishing 7% also say they don't know exactly what design rules and design codes are. So you're a very informed audience. May I say, I'm not surprised because you're all neighborhood planners, so that's good. And I shall stop sharing that poll. Okay, Tony?
Great. Well, thank you. That's yeah, very interesting result actually. Not quite what I expected, so maybe I should have written down what I expected beforehand. Right, we're going to move on to.
What did you expect, Tony? What did you expect?
We will find later. So Nicholas, hello, welcome.
Hello.
Just by way of introduction to you, if I may. So welcome to Nicholas Boyce-Smith, known to many of us as the driving force behind Create Streets. And one of the things Create Streets has been doing is really pushing the need for new development and building to better respect local preferences. Nicholas ended up as co-chair of the influential Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission. Nicholas is now leading the process for establishing a new office for place out of the MHCLG part of government. And I think it's fair to say, so let's see how it goes, that historically Nicholas has been a friend of neighbourhood planning and supporter of the work that neighbourhood planners and the voice.
I hope you still feel so in a few minutes.
So we'll hand over to you and we'll see how we feel afterwards, Nicholas.
Oh dear, oh dear. Thank you, Tony, and thank you all very much. Some familiar and friendly faces that I know, and no doubt other faces perhaps aren't friendly, I don't know. Apologies, I was a few minutes late on the call as I had to come off another thing that wouldn't end on time, so sorry for that. I am going to share my screen.
Give me 1 second, Nicholas.
Thank you. Yes, I'm host disabled, participant screen sharing. If you
I have done that now. So I hope you will be able to do so.
Yes, I can. Give me 2 seconds. Of course, now where has my screen gone? Oh dear. Hang on, where's it gone? Show all windows. Hang on, bear with me. Technical error. It's disappeared. There it is. I've got a little bit too much open, I fear. There we go. And it's not going to be on the. It's not nice and neatly on the front page. So forgive me, because I bounced off another call. That's what you're getting later. You'll have to wait for that. Just 2 seconds.
You can see the screen.
Can you see the screen? Excellent. Yeah. And I'll just go back to. And is that
full screen mode? Not yet.
No. I'm just going to. Have you got full screen mode now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Tony has asked me just to talk about some of the recent changes or announcements, perhaps more than changes, and some of the steps over the last few years, particularly with reference to neighbourhood planning. I think these are the things. Tony or Angela, if you're looking for me to speak about something else, you should say so now. But I thought I'd say a bit about the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission. Though it sort of seems like ancient history. It's not really. It's only just over a year ago, but so much has happened in that last year that it does seem a long, long time ago. Whilst we were doing that, the government published its National Design Guide. You obviously all know about the white paper. And then there was a suite of announcements exactly a year after the B4C Commission reported on the 30th of January of this year, which I'll take as a body. I don't really have slides on that last set, I'm afraid, but hopefully I can do a little bit from memory. Does that sound of some, hopefully that's of some interest to you all. I've got more slides on the B4C, but I'll go through that quite quickly. But I thought what might be helpful would be just to give you all a little bit of the thinking and the rationale. Sorry, crikey, that's gone wrong. Sorry, what's gone on there? Not sure what happened. For some reason, I've just lost my thing. There it is. Behind the B4C, before touching more briefly on all the rest. I mean, just one thing to say, when it was created right at the end of 2018, I think it'd be fair to say it caused some controversy, particularly amongst designers. I think by the time we published, actually perhaps to a lot of people's surprise, it was met with almost unanimous agreement. I'm aware of a couple of architectural journalists who hated it, and I know that the chairman of Redrow hated it. So maybe that's a good set of enemies to have. I don't know, but everyone else seemed to be vaguely positive, broadly, in some cases very strongly positive. We tried to get out around the country very broadly. We did several calls for evidence. We published an interim report and then sought detailed responses to that, and set up a series of working groups who had a series of more detailed meetings to work up our detailed proposals. We set this as our challenge. the need for new homes, need to be carbon neutral by 2050, the need to end the scandal of left behind places, and the realization that we need to worry, I think I put in the far more about mental health and well-being, and above all about its relationship with the built environment and the process of planning and creating the places that we live and work in. We had lots of startling evidence. This is my favorite quote. I think that came via Andy Cameron, who was one of our advisors, a very expert street designer. And actually, despite all the sort of the noise in the press, perhaps particularly in the trade press, we very quickly started getting large numbers of unsolicited, in many cases, feedback that that people were positive that we were talking about this. In Harvey from Civic Voice, I'm sure is known to many of you. Some polls that were done both by Civic Voice and by the RTPI actually showed that the desire for quality design, for beautiful places, for green places was not quite ubiquitous, but certainly fairly close. And there was a theme that kept coming up, which was that people were very pleased we were talking about this and almost felt empowered to be able to turn around to developers or the council and say, we care about this. This isn't just some frippery. This is something profound. We defined beauty in our final report, and indeed in our interim report, at 3 levels: beautiful buildings, beautiful places, and beautifully placed. I've like where things sit in the landscape and where development goes, what the development pattern is, and obviously that's got very profound implications for sustainable development. We came to the view that, I think unsurprisingly, we can and do create beautiful places still today. So it's not as if we can't do it as a society, and we do that many times in many places. However, too often we don't show pictures of individual houses and say this is an ugly house, because that doesn't seem, I think, a very appropriate thing to do. But I think the general view on this building is fairly clear. But in a way, this is a more perennial problem. It's the consistent degradation of our small towns and villages and smaller cities up and down the country. In order to have the use of this photo, I wasn't allowed to comment on it, so I shall pass no comment on this photo. But this is a piece of infrastructure due to HS2, and you must make your own judgments on it. We wanted to help start a process whereby planning ceases to be seen as a shield against ugly development, but actually starts being seen as a sword, whereby we as a society and as a culture can create better places that are better for the environment and better for us. And also to make the point that development does not have to be degradatory. It can actually be regenerative. It can make things better, and to fundamentally change the instinctive response of our fellow citizens up and down the country. Now, we recognize that is clearly a multi-year thing to do. It's not going to just happen because we wrote this report, but perhaps if in some small way we can help start the cascade to get there. Why are we in the mess that we are? Well, I think there are 4 key reasons. And this is not something that is UK specific. About 70, 80 years ago, it got very much cheaper to build very cheap, very large buildings very badly, which is something we couldn't do 150 years ago. Linked to that, post-World War I, as labour, which is in a way a good thing, got much more expensive. The commercial constraints and incentives to build very cheaply strengthened. We invented the motor car. Motor car in many ways is a marvellous thing. It gives people lots of liberty. It gives to the broad mass of population the same liberty that rich people had in the 19th or the 18th centuries. But clearly we mustn't confuse the role of the motor car outside towns and villages and inside. And this is a graphic that my team in Create Streets did for the report to make the point, I hope clearly. We also encountered a huge amount of evidence that we can not predict what effect design will have on an individual human, but that there are very, very clear trends in the data about the sorts of places that tend to be good for us. Not all people all the time, but most people most of the time. Street trees is a very strong example where there are really multiple studies now in multiple countries correlating more trees in streets with cleaner air, perhaps not surprisingly, but also with slower traffic, and also with people walking more, and also people having personal better health outcomes. In some studies, even when you can control for socioeconomic demographics. So, there are no completely free lunches in life. Nothing is always true. Street trees are about as close as you're ever statistically likely to get, with normal caveats apply. There's also clear evidence that clear block patterns are very good for communities. Children tend to play out more when there's private or very safely communal green space. Green spaces that are overlooked are better used. And block patterns such as this, where you've got clear backs and clear fronts in several studies in this country, in Australia, and a couple more, are associated with lower crime. So there are things that are normally right. Control studies also show, and I can't actually see my top of my screen here, that when you get repetition in a pattern, colour, coherent complexity, some symmetry, some texture, areas that it's easy to walk in, that is correlated with people knowing more of their neighbours and having more coherent and structured lives. For some reason, I'm losing the top of my screen. Gentle density is very often, not always, is very often the best way to maximise well-being. It optimises between our personal need for space, but also the proximity and mixed use that towns and villages and cities permit. Traffic, in several good studies, this is the famous one from 1977, some of you will know it, Brian Appleyard, but it's also been replicated more recently in Bristol. Heavy traffic streets are correlated with knowing a few of your neighbours. These colours, these lines, as some of you will know, are maps of friendship patterns across 3 streets of different levels of knowledge. We also realised that actually, and this perhaps is politically one of our most important points, it isn't new. Planning wasn't invented in the 1940s. And I'm going to be a little bit simplifying here, and a couple of you have heard me say this point before, but if the crude left-wing view of history of planning in this country is, marvellous Mr. Attlee and the good socialists of the 1940s created it, and I guess the crude right-wing view is the same but opposite. If only we could refree the market to how it was before evil Mr. Attlee. I'm being obviously simplifying, but neither of those points are correct. This is a city from the Indus Valley. There is which has good evidence of some sort of controlled block structure, and there's really very coherent evidence, ancient Rome, Middle Ages, excellent documents, and clearly in the building patterns that this is something that states do, particularly in towns and cities. It's a slightly different situation once you get outside. So this is at the irreducible core of what countries and states and city-states particularly do, because there are uncontrollable externalities between individuals in a town or urban space. So trying to change the framing of the debate in a way for both right and left, so we can get into a more productive debate about, if that's the case, how do we do it? Because once you have that conversation, then you get into the wider evidence about what type of regulatory approach tends to not create barriers to entry, tends to allow things to people to produce goods and is predictable. Because the most successful regulation in nearly every situation is more predictable, and so it isn't a barrier to entry to people wishing to do what they wish to do. It's a classic example of this, no doubt known to many of you, the consequences of the 1774 Building Act, which is one of a series of acts that followed the fire of London in 1666, which essentially set down house types. So, late 18th, early 19th century London was a far more regulated place than the London we've lived in, actually in all of the last 50 or 60 years in many ways. We came up with these themes, and I think if I click, yes, I'll let that just go through. Oops, sorry, gone too far. Planning, the key need for a more predictable level playing field. Neighbourhoods, creating places, not just houses, changing the way we think about it. Ending the scandal left behind places, bringing a critical point for you all, I'm sure, bringing the democracy forward. So there's more effective role for community engagement in the setting of local plans as well as just neighbourhood plans. Obviously, we were strong advocates for neighbourhood planning. Lots of important things I won't go into now on the management and the KPIs of public sector bodies, specifically Homes England, where I think we argued quite strongly, I hope, that they were incentivising the wrong things. Important points, probably a little less relevant for today's discussion, on the education and skills of architects, urban designers, and many who work in the public sector. And then another one, and one that sadly has not yet been picked up by the government, stewardship and the need to incentivise responsibility to the future in the way we develop land. And a lot of the requirements there were actually about changes to the tax system, as well as changes to the KPIs of bits of the public sector. And also changing the disincentive in VAT against brownfield redevelopment. That has not yet taken forward. Some of the planning stuff has been. Now, I'm not going to go through all our proposals because I think I will run out of time. But you can see this is the summary of our core proposals under the planning space. The first was that the NPPF should ask for beauty, should set it as a strategic goal, not something that you define at that level, but that it's alongside sustainability and the core aims of planning. And that, I'm pleased to say, is something that has gone into the new draft of the NPPF. That we should expect a net gain in development. And development should make things better in biodiversity and other terms. Again, something that's been picked up, and also links to other legislation. That ministers should sort of almost celebrate saying no to ugliness. And again, that's been picked up in the NPPF. But that crucially, and this is a very, very important point, it is not for the government to define what good means locally. That is for local authorities, that is for neighbourhood forums, that is for parishes, that is for local communities. No doubt we'll come back to that. But they should do so within a clear carapace. Importance of master planning. And yes, we made a strong case for the use of form-based codes because they're visual, because they permit greater certainty. It's a way of allowing a wider range of people to input into neighbourhood planning, to setting of local plans. And I although we recognise the great efforts that many local officials make, bluntly, local plans are not effectively consulted on. They're too complex, too verbal, too uncertain, too weak. And then on permitted development, we made our case very carefully. I think it is perfectly acceptable and sensible for some things to go through permitted development. It's ridiculous to have everything done through the planning system. But when that is the case, there need to be very clear standards. So it is a subtle, I think, change to the government's position. The flip side for this is that if you're going to have a more certain system with it easier to produce to develop things if you meet the locally agreed carapace, that enforcement does need to be firmer and clearer if you say you're going to do one thing and you do another. And I think that's an area where focus needs to grow in the years to come. Just a couple more points, then I'll move on. This was just a quick analysis that I did, looking at the different natures of the local plan in our country versus other countries. And you can make the same point if you look at different American states as well. And the key point that comes out as well is actually our local plans tend to get set over a much wider area. This is local plans, not neighbourhood plans. It's actually our local plans are much, much weaker. Whether you compare to elements of zoning in the States, which has other problems, which you don't need to go into now, or if you compare it to elements of, for example, a code d'urbanisation in France, our plans are policy, not regulatory, and tend to be far less binding. And the consequence is, or one of the consequences, is that we have a far more concentrated development market, and the sort of self-build, custom-build, market entrant, not-for-profit provider who used to build lots of our homes, as essentially with each economic crisis has been, or cycle I should say, has been squeezed out of the market. It is no surprise that we have one of the most concentrated markets in the world because we have the most unclear regulatory system, planning system. We made a case, obviously, for form-based codes, and that PD needs to have standards. This is the famous one that I'm sure some of you know. The inspector considered it not a positive living environment. I think that's probably fair, certainly fair, I should add, but couldn't say no to it. Well, that's clearly not acceptable. Communities bringing democracy forward, ensuring, and I think there's more work to be done on this, but ensuring wider and more effective public engagement on the creation of local plans. Digital technology will make some of that easier. So, as CGIs, map-based tools allow us to compare buildings, places more easily, more cheaply to more people than have ever been the case before. Let me just go back to this, but also that there should be potential possibilities, and this is touched on in the white paper, to permit streets or neighbourhood plans or parishes to look at how intensification of sites could be done either by use or by density. If that's locally permitted. So these are some of the key themes we mentioned. Stewardship I've touched on. Key thing there was creating a tax level playing field both by VAT and by income versus capital gains tax. We pushed for a Minister of Place, haven't got that yet. We have got for the support on chief placemaker in local authorities, and actually, sorry, the VAT point is there about recycling of buildings. And this is actually quite an important point on sustainability, which is that places that are beautiful and that are loved, they find new uses. They're converted generation after generation. This barn in Wiltshire is about 800 years old. No one is going to be, well, other than by PD into a completely new building, going to be converting that into anything. This was recycled into that. So we made a strong case for the recycling of buildings and against boxland. This is not the future. We believe this is the future, an environment in which people can walk and know more of their neighbours and lead more sustainable patterns. And that there are actually many opportunities to do something about boxland. That then leads to the point there are lots of unintended consequences in some bits of building regs, more often in local plans, against gentle density. So the case we make for gentle density, where you tend to have people living a little bit more cheek by jowl, is something that is often made hard to do by back-to-back distance or critically parking requirements. We also put out some detail on how streets become cleaner and more healthy, and we could clean urban air, and made a case for regreening our towns and cities, made a very clear case for street trees. Some people said that was too simplistic, but you need simplistic targets as well as the detail. You need to be able to talk at different levels. Also about the idea of one fruit tree per house for every house that's built. Again, that's something that local authorities and parish councillors and neighbourhood forums should make a call on. I'll jump over education, and I've touched on management, which is about KPIs, and this is also where we made put in a lot of points about the importance of digital planning. And that ultimately we need, and this comes back to the point I made at the beginning, to move from a vicious circle of parasitic development, where people are unclear what will happen, don't trust the system, and that's very clear in the data. 2% of people trust developers, I think it's 7% trust the local planning system. That's clearly not good enough. Those numbers are from memory, but even if they're double that, they're still not good enough. And therefore, there's an instinctive opposition to new development, and I'm sure many of you will know that from your work as neighbourhood planners. That means there are insufficient homes in the right place, and that then puts constrained allocation of new homes, high land costs, and all the pressures on build costs that you'll all be familiar with. So ultimately, and this is a generational task, this is not going to happen under the next couple of years, we need to move to a virtuous circle of regenerative development with clearer quality asks from the planning system, removal of unintended incentives for next field development model, focus on places, not just homes, not houses. That's not going to overnight lead to less opposition to new homes, but by bringing the democracy forward to the plan making, so there's more focus on the plan making and yes, less on the development control with simple and more predictable regulation. We set out detail on when things can happen, some of which is actually happening, I'm astonished to say. I won't go through that now. This was the launch, as I think a couple of you, were there in Vauxhall, no, Lambeth. And I think the point I will make is, the Secretary of State welcomed it very, very warmly. Perhaps more surprisingly, so did architects. This is the marvellous Annalie Riches, co-founder Michael Riches, the marvellous David Rudlin, Academy of Urbanism, and obviously he's been working subsequently on the Urban Design Code. It's just been published. TCPA, IMB Alliance. So we managed, I think, to get a good suite of responses, and also the public philosopher Alain de Botton, who's very kind about it. So I think that hopefully helped to set some of the change of direction that now does seem to be happening. Is it okay if I go on for a couple more minutes, Tony? I'm sorry, I'm conscious that I might have gone on for too long. No, is this okay? Fine. Sorry. Yeah. Now, apologies, I haven't got as many slides on the rest, but you'll probably be rather pleased by that. It's worth saying, whilst we were doing that, the government published its National Design Guide. I think that's been slightly overtaken by the new Model Design Code, but the framework in there, which I think is a good one. My personal framework's a little different, but it covers the good things. And because this is now picked up in the National Design Code, for all of you writing neighbourhood plans, I'd certainly urge you to reference this. It gives you a really good, I'm not a planning advisor, I should stress, it gives you a really good series of hooks to pull on. I think several of us felt, certainly I did, that the National Design Guide was good as far as it went, but actually a bit more detail would be necessary if it was to actually have, to be really helpful as a planning document and give guidance that local authorities and parish councils and others needed. And one of the things I should have said, and I'm conscious I'm speaking to London, to London neighbourhood planners here, but it was really striking as we went up and down the country how the workshops and roundtables that we ran with local officials and others were very different in bits of the country. And forgive me, I know a lot of you will probably cavil at what I'm about to say, but actually you guys in some ways have it easy, because actually the quality and the nature and the size of the teams in urban design and elsewhere in London councils, on the whole, I know there's some exceptions, does tend to be pretty good. And having, I know quite a few of them, you've got some really first-class people working in some of the London councils. That's not to say there aren't good people working elsewhere. Of course there are. There's certainly far fewer of them. And the political pressure, this is development, we need development, therefore we need this, I'm afraid is pretty overwhelming in some places. The lack of interest, they just don't have the capacity, or in a way it's more profound than that. They've sort of lost the desire, the ability to almost raise up their aspirations. And ultimately we need to be about changing that. The government white paper, which you don't need me to talk about, but I would put out, and I can say this, I can't tell you anyway, I don't know what was in the minds of ministers and others and officials when they pulled this together, but I can say, I was one of the outsiders sort of advising on a few elements of it. The desire to have neighbourhood planning in there, it seemed to me to be pretty fundamental for certainly all the officials and ministers I spoke to. I can't speak for everyone. I've not pulled out the section on neighbourhood planning here. I actually pulled out something from much earlier on. So, the desire for neighbourhood plans to be up there helping set codes and to be part of this strategic shift in planning, it is there in the white paper. So what that means in practice, I know there are concerns. And obviously that's then, hang on, forgive me. Yeah, that's then picked up in Proposal 9. Which very categorically commits, as you I'm sure will know, to continuing them, but actually to support them to make better use of digital tools. And there's another one on neighbourhood planning elsewhere, and to be part of the enhanced, more clearer and more visual set of local plans that will emerge in years to come. So I hope that feels positive. As I say, I'm not responsible for that text, but I was feeding into it very much, I hope, to that end. There was then, as you will all know, a suite of announcements just over a month ago. I apologize, I don't have, I've chucked in a couple of bits from National New Model Design Code, but I haven't got the proper slides on this. I think just say following quick things. I think the new Model Design Code is a really good document. I would urge you to read it if you haven't. And certainly we, on the Create Streets website, we've got a YouTube page. We ran a webinar with its primary authors, Andy Van Bradsky, the government architect, and David Rudlin from Urbed, which I'd certainly encourage you to watch. If any of you want to have a link to it, just email me afterwards and I will send it to you. I won't try and replicate everything they said, because they would do it much better than me. But it's got a lot of good stuff in there. Now, it's not actually, in a way, it's a misnomer. It's not a design code. It's a framework and a process. And the work that I and others will need to do, and all of us will need to do in the months and years to come, will be working out how to do that more simply on smaller scales. But I think it's got lots of good, it's got the right framework, and I think it's got lots of the right hooks in there. So you do have a look at that. Happy to take more questions, but if they're of the what's on page 27 nature, I may fail them. Second point is that the formal response to the B4C Commission was published. Now, obviously, quite a lot of that had already been prefigured in the white paper or in various announcements over the year, but it was a very positive response. Certainly on the planning side, I think there is more to do on stewardship and tax, and I think like to see more movement with Homes England's and KPIs there, but actually the new chairman, Peter Freeman, is saying, I think, many of the right things. I don't believe we'll do them for the record, but in terms of some of the key points about putting beauty and what the public like right at the heart of the planning system at a strategic level, as opposed to just not being there, that is now there in the draft text. So we dare to hope that is a good thing. So that's C as well as B. And then the announcement that we'll be creating an office, well, the government will be creating an office for place. That had already been mentioned a few months before, but I'm now, as a statement of fact, so I'm chairing a steering group looking at that, looking at some of the ways that might work, talking to officials and ministers about budgets and timeframes and what will work and what won't. And I can't say more about that just because we're literally just trying to work out how it will go. But it's not saying anything surprising to say clearly its primary focus, as announced in the white paper and in ministerial subsequent announcements, is about, above all, upskilling and helping communities, neighbourhood groups and local authorities to put more focus on a clearer planning system to allow better, more healthy, more beautiful and more sustainable places to be created more of the time. We can create places like this, but we just do not do it enough, as I suspect you, well, I imagine most of you would agree. So it will be of that nature. I hope very soon, actually, to be able to sort of share what we're saying and to invite anyone, including all of you, to give feedback and thoughts on that. I hope that's not too far off, but that when that is not completely in my hands. I think that's it. I do have pictures of the National Model Design Code, but I'm not sure that adds much value. So I will stop there and hope that was of some interest or use.
That's really, really helpful, Nicholas. Thank you, both as a prime of the announcements, but also a degree of editorial comment in there as well, to give us a steer as to where your sort of priorities and focus are. We've got a whole series of questions and issues that people have raised. So
can I say one thing before we dive in? And I guess it's a caveat, yes, of course, for all of you. So I'm a glass half full sort of guy. This is my second career. And I've got a 30-year mission to make places better and help communities and councils do that. So I feel like I push at this, and I'm conscious that we're going to fail as well as win on some things. So sometimes I get accused of being naive and overambitious and overhopeful on all this. And lots could go wrong, because lots can always go wrong in life. But I do believe we're moving in the right direction, and that's. So I should have added that as well. Sorry.
Not at all. So where we're going to handle this is I'm just going to either read out or try and summarise the points that have been raised and fire them at you. And if you want to respond in whatever way you feel appropriate. So Simon Burkett, heavily involved in the Knightsbridge neighbourhood plan, among other things, asked a question about how neighbourhood planning fits into the new approach, such as design codes preparation, which is envisaged by the changes that are you've just run through from government. Where does it fit in what feels like quite a complicated set of different tools and processes that are knocking about now?
Yes, and I should, I guess, caveat my answer to this, and indeed to all answers I'll give. I know there's Angela Koch on the call. I'm not a planning advisor, so I wouldn't want you to sort of set the thing. Nicholas should be able to give us the precise answer with absolute precision on every bit of the process. That's not what I'm. I can do bits of it, but I'd be a bit nervous getting it wrong. So just sort of caveat first thing, if you don't mind me saying that, with apologies. the intent, as I understand it, and certainly with what I was writing in the B4C report, is that neighbourhood planning, both as parish and neighbourhood forums, plays a key role, in many ways the key role, in defining a local design code. So I'd certainly, based on your earlier poll, I think it was 88% of you were, in favour of doing it, possibly or likely. So I'd certainly encourage you to do that. Set a code based, evidenced on what people like. Get the evidence for that. I think there's a further question we can go into on that. And as the planning system evolves, we're not in the new planning system yet, though there are some changes to the NPPF, obviously, that are coming very soon. As the planning system evolves, the clearer you can be on that, I think the greater certainty you can have that development will need to link to that, because it'll get harder for landowners and developers to do things that is in contradiction of a clearly evidenced visual map-based statement. Now, I'm front-running where the white paper may go, because we've obviously not seen the legislation. Me no more than you. So, if you like, that's a statement of intent rather, or a statement of direction rather than of precision.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Neil Homer, who is a planning advisor.
Oh yes,
on
Neil.
neighbourhood planning. Related question, specifically on the Office for Place. So, will the Office for Place be exploring how neighbourhood plan to address design in their policies as things have evolved from guidance to coding over the last 10 years? Because there's a lack of research really in understanding the role that neighbourhood planning has played in this area. Thank you.
It's a really good question. So we, and I have to be a little bit careful here. So forgive me if I'm a bit cutesy, but research into what works and what doesn't, where there's capabilities and capacity and where there isn't, is clearly critical. Understanding what's working, what isn't. Understanding ways in which groups with differing levels of size and budget can cost efficiently and effectively ascertain things is clearly crucial to anyone approaching this, and I would hope that the Office for Place is playing its part in that. I hope that wasn't too obscure. I think that's a yes. I think that's as close as I can get to a yes. Can I just ask, do you have is it a summer or whatever that will find out more about the Office for Place? Do you have any sense of that? Pass. Okay. So sooner than that, I hope, but I can't make a commitment because it's just that's not for me to control. That's fine. Clyde Whitaker asks, do you think that MHCLG now gets, quote unquote, the investment communities have made in their neighbourhood plans, and the fact that design is already integral to these? Do they understand that design is not just about the colour of front doors or the type of stone, but it's integral to wider objectives to promote placemaking, and that's what neighbourhood planning is all about? I think it's, again, a very good question. I thought I'd get good questions. First point, just to remind you, MHCLG, like government, there isn't one, government doesn't have one mind. Government is hundreds, thousands of people. So are there officials, are there ministers and members of parliament and indeed members of House of Lords, like local councils, who get that? Yes, there definitely are. And I know some of them personally. Does that mean all the government do? No, probably not, I suspect. But are the people within government who get that and are on the side for that? I do honestly believe that there are. Clearly, there are lots of trades-off in what happens in legislation and in government expenditure. Just on the specifics of your question, and that it's not just the colour of front doors, and I certainly agree that it's not just the colour of front doors. I just come back because I think some neighbourhood forums, and probably not anyone here, but design takes place. I define place at 3 levels, if you like, at the level of the building, the place, and where development occurs. And I think some neighbourhood plans, certainly some that I've read, get so focused on the second level that they miss the first level. And certainly the work Create Streets does, when we then go and engage with the wider public, perhaps people who have not been so engaged in the neighbourhood planning process, and you'll all know that does happen. Actually, you do need to engage at all levels, because the human response to a street is obviously a function of the traffic and how easy it is to walk, but it is also a function of how well enclosed it is and the way in which it's enclosed, the enclosure ratio. So just to those of you, because that is the sort of the standard, almost the standard industry view, is it's very complex. Therefore, you can't look at just what a building looks like. But if you miss out what buildings and streets look like, you do miss out quite a primary driver of human response to places. Not the only driver, but we are visual creatures, and we take, you know, between 70 and 90% of our evidence in visually. So don't forget that bit, but I agree, it is not just that. Sorry, that was a little rant on the back of the question. Please forgive me.
That's fine. Jen Manuel, who's based up in Newcastle University, academic and other things, working on these issues, raises issues around permitted development rights. So lots of research showing the detrimental impact on placemaking from permitted development rights. How does the design agenda plan to tackle that, particularly when new standards were brought in last year but don't go far enough and the extension of permitted development continues?
I think this is, you know, is an important and interesting question. We Create Streets published a report, not on PD per se, but I guess it did touch on it, which you can see on our website. We do need to let places evolve. I forget the precise number. We've got, I forget how many hundreds of thousands, it might even be millions of shops empty right now. Now, I hope a whole bunch of them will come back, I hope, after the pandemic. And hopefully some of their landlords will allow their rental levels to rebase, to allow more local shops, non-changed shops. So a whole bunch will hopefully come back. But I think we do have to accept that a whole bunch of those shops are not going to come back. And that, and I'm very much thinking about some of the conversations I had, like I think the speakers from Newcastle, which Newcastle's quite a prosperous city, but some of the less prosperous towns and cities around the country. The planning system does not at present, and I don't think ever will, have the capacity to manage that in the way they currently seek to manage it. So there have to be some systemic ways to allow for places to evolve without them needing to be micromanaged from on high. So then I think you get, and this is my answer to your question, to ultimately the answer, which is you do need to allow, whether it's through change of use, through use classes or through PD, you do need to allow some things to change use and evolve, but you just need to put very clear quality constraints around that. Now, you can have a good democratic argument about what those quality constraints should be. What I think has not worked, to put it mildly, with PD is if you've got, you know, no minimum home sizes, none of the window regs, clearly it's been creating homes that are, you know, unacceptable for the residents, and clearly it's been putting homes in the wrong place. So, I mean, putting homes in the middle of an industrial park is not what we want to do. But that doesn't actually preclude necessarily further changes to that use. So, you know, I think it's to try and, I'm saying what We Create Streets is trying to do is to change the nature of the discussion on PD and make it a little bit less extreme on both sides. How can we bring in quality control to the impact it will have on, say, the public realm? Some shops are going to become homes. Not all can, many shouldn't, but some will. How do we allow councils to manage that whilst not destroying the high street? Yes, you have some controls on where you prevent it in some places, but I think you have to accept it is going to happen in other places, and then through, you know, design codes or other mechanisms to permit that to happen. So, I mean, I think certainly observing some of the debate, I think the PD is bad, therefore we should do it all through current planning processes. I think that's a sillier position, as there should be a complete free market on anything that happens in the high street or in development. I think both positions, I think, are hard to hold. I'm not sure that's the answer you wanted, but that's the answer I can give you.
Meenakshi Sharma brings us to the London plan. So what does Nicholas think of the spatial distribution of housing in the London plan? How can the deprived town centre areas, where most of the units are to be situated, have any say in the planning process? Question, should the London plan be challenged legally?
I'm not going to answer that last bit. I have no idea. I've read bits of it since it was published at the end of last year. I have not read it all enough to give a meaningful answer to that. It's sort of sitting on my list of things I need to look at more since it was republished. So I think I'm going to dodge that one. I apologise. Okay.
Henry Peterson, who's one of our conveners of Neighbourhood Planners.London, active in various neighbourhood plans in West London, asking around the government-funded research into piloting the design code. And whether you've got any insights into how that will be distributed, and particularly whether there'll be anything going on in London or with neighbourhood plans. It was a concern that we expressed that neighbourhood planning was left out of that. It seemed to be going to local planning authorities.
I think it's a very fair point, actually. Yes, it is going to local authorities, and I think you should push at that. I think it's a very fair point. I forget precisely what's been said publicly, but I think this has been said publicly. I mean, it's not, at the moment, it's not research. Although obviously research hopefully flows off the back. It is pilots. It's 10 pilots with more to follow. Clearly, they're going to be distributed around the country, both regionally, but also in terms of the nature of the local council, urban, suburban, rural, prosperous, less prosperous. I would hope different political situations, less whether it's blue or red, but more whether it's a firmly controlled council, always this colour, or whether it's one that's on the brink, moves around a bit, or whether it's one where you've got perhaps one of the non-political, local activist group taking control for a while, because those are very different dynamics for what's possible, physically in a political context. So I think it's been said, and certainly should be the case, that it'll be a good range of that, and that will then be research on what works after it. I think it's a fair point. I'm happy to say this. I think in some way, TBD, neighbourhood plans, both forums in an urban context and parishes in a non-urban context, should be part of that. So I would hope that that's, as time and further pilots are announced, I would hope that's part of it.
Just so you know, Neighbourhood Planners.London did make that point shortly after the announcement.
Yeah, you were quite right to.
We haven't had any feedback.
You were quite right to make that point.
Eileen Conn, who's very active in Peckham Vision and all that, asked the question really about, is the only way of getting a grip through a neighbourhood plan. So many local areas have very active community action in planning and in all the local planning policy actions, but they haven't had the capacity to add to their community group workloads a neighbourhood forum and developing a neighbourhood plan. Are you saying that they and their communities will be excluded from these new processes about design codes? So if you haven't got a neighbourhood plan or forum, are you left out?
I hope not. You're the closest to me. I'm just down the road from Peckham, so that's just literally half a mile away. I very much hope not. And certainly the strong case, we made in the B4C report that I think did get picked up in the white paper is that, I think I'm slightly repeating what I said in my talk, but that community engagement on local plans has broken. And it's not just a sort of analog digital thing, it's a more profound thing than this. I hope that no one will be offended. I suspect in fact, I know there are a couple of former planners on the call. Local plans are really dreary, dull, hard to interpret documents. I'm really sorry if that causes offense, it's not meant to. They're hard to get a handle on. They're terrible. I mean, like most of you, I'm interested in these things. I don't look forward to reading a local plan. It's something I'll put off if I can do something else. And it is not surprising, and they're much weaker documents than their equivalents to most countries, and they cover a wider area. So we're talking about something that's less local, less specific, and less powerful, difficult to understand, and essentially has become a legalistic policy document rather than a regulatory visual map-based document. There are some partial exceptions to that, but not many that I can immediately think of. So that's why, really, even the best councils, with some of the best officials, in my judgment, and certainly some of the feedback and evidence I've received in the past, are struggling to engage the wider public in this. And so this is to get to your question. So if we fix that, and by we, it's the government's role, but I think it's also for all of us who are passionate about this, if we as a generation fix that, and it will not happen in the next couple of years, it's going to take a while, then it should be easier for a wider range of people to feed in to where they'd like to see development, of what nature it should be, where it should go, and what it should look like and what it should be. It is not as hard as I think we've managed to make it. And so therefore I passionately hope, I desperately believe that neighbourhood planning will continue to be a key leg, because we're going to need to have codes defining things locally as well as a framework at a slightly higher level. Clearly, we can't assume that there will be a neighbourhood plan created, but in the parish area, I think you sort of could possibly. I'm speculating, I don't know, but certainly in urban areas, it gets harder to assume that, and indeed you shouldn't. So local authorities will need to make sure that they are also engaging in a way that people feed in constructively, early, and sensibly. I hope that's helpful.
Well, Alexander Nicol also makes a point about local plans. You've spoken about having clearer local plans, but the white paper would radically slash local plans, leaving a big hole between national and neighbourhood planning. Given that neighbourhood plans are produced by volunteers with tiny resources, local plans produced by professionals who can be held accountable, is this creating an important gap?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm not responsible for the white paper, but I think that's more reading the criticism of the people who don't like it rather than the white paper. Certainly the intent of some of us feeding in was sort of the opposite of that. So a thing can be shorter and better. In fact, I'd say that normally things that are shorter tend to be better. Obviously, there is an end point to that. But yeah, well, let's take the London plan. I mean, every interest group and focus group and lobby has got its paragraph in the London plan. And the same is true to a lesser extent in many local plans. You can use elements of the London plan to argue almost anything. I'm slightly simplifying. Something that ends up being clearer and more visual and more verbal is something that can, set the boundaries of development and what is and isn't possible. And look, and the key thing here is, because the money that landowners, homeowners, local charities, local businesses, startups, the money that, as many of you will know, that they spend pre-planning is very expensive money that's hard to raise, because if you don't get planning, you've lost it all. That's the key. We Create Streets are working with various community groups and charities up and down the country. That's the problem. I mean, right now we've got, if we can get clarity that we're going to get planning permission on some community-led homes we're doing in a town centre, not in London, we've got the money all sorted. But the problem is the money to get the planning. So we've got to democratise that part of the process, so that we are not continuing to rely on a very small number of well-financed people to be our developers. It's an insane situation we've got ourselves in, and defending a very obscure planning system is, I'm afraid, is defending ultimately. So I'm not saying no one's doing this, but is ultimately defending a situation in which most of us, whether it's as personal homeowners or as members of civic society, are not able to do what is much more prevalent in most countries and was much more prevalent in this country historically, which is actually lead on development and the creation of places under a clear regulatory system. You shouldn't be a complete free-for-all. You can't, do nothing but build anything you like, because you're going to create externalities for your neighbour. That is something that needs to be regulated. But within that carapace, it should be much clearer what we can and can't do. And that is democratic, and we're not in that situation at the moment.
Got 4 or 5 more, if I can just keep going. Lorraine Hart makes a related point, actually. Would Nicholas make a link between the weakness of local plans in terms of visual content and detail, and the need in development control to take account of viability, which is defined by a developer?
Yes, because the whole point now is, if you're the developer who's feels he can game the system the best, and perhaps has got the best lawyers or the most experience. Now, actually, it's got a bit better in the last few years, thanks to the great work that Toby Lloyd was doing when he was in number 10. But absolutely, if it's much clearer what you can and can't do, then you have to compete on other things. And right now, it's a race to the bottom. And that's, by the way, particularly true in areas of high land value and high competition. The dynamics change a little bit in how they pan out in other areas, but it's certainly true here.
Ben Castell, who is involved in the neighbourhood plan in North London and also providing technical support for neighbourhood planning. Do you have a view on the near silence in the National Model Design Code on neighbourhood planning?
Do I have a view on that? How much? I mean, actually, I don't know off the top of my head how much it is referenced. I should know. How much is it referenced?
Very little, if at all.
Yeah. Well, I think all of us, I include myself in this, need to make sure that as it's interpreted, neighbourhood planning plays a key role in that.
I'm informed it's once it gets a reference.
Okay, well, thank you. So I would, I hereby say this, I'd love the next iteration to increase that. Let's aim for twice, and then let's go for 4th, and then let's go for 8. Let's see if we get a series going.
We'll set this as a KPI for the Office for Place.
I think. Okay, thanks, Tony.
So Nick Bailey and Rich Clark both ask the sort of $6 million question, really, which is, what's the exact wording? Will local authorities feel more confident of refusing applications which clearly fail to meet national and local design codes or guides? Similarly, Rich, if something is clearly ugly, will that be enough to be thrown out, or will there need to be a specification about what beauty is appropriate?
Very good question, and I mean, I hope so is my short answer. I mean, I think probably we need to see how the new NPPF pans out to give a confident answer. But I mean, that certainly was the intent of the suggestions that we made a year ago to the changes to the NPPF. Now, this is just a matter of sort of factual record. We suggested precise wording, and Adrian Penfold, who's a former head of a local planning authority and also a former head of planning at British Land, pulled together a very expert working group of planning lawyers and consultants who advised us on the specific wording. Now that the government has slightly changed the wording, I'm not sure anyone outside government quite knows what the ramifications of those specific changes are. I'm sure there's good reasons for them, but the intent is to make it easier for bad, ugly and unpopular development to be turned down. And ultimately for development that fits it to be turned up, or said yes to. But
Christine Cowdray asks about what information you might use to form the basis of design code. So can existing conservation area audits and management plans be used to form the basis of a design code?
Again, caveat that I'm not a planning advisor. I would believe so. I believe so.
Because clearly it's going to help lots of people if you don't have to start from scratch.
Yes, I can see, I mean, again, I'm not a planning advisor. I can see no reason why it couldn't. I mean, I guess if it dated from the 1950s, possibly not, but.
We have two more, I think. Yes, two more. So Neil Homer's got in again.
You've had your go, Neil.
Neighbourhood development orders have been woefully underused in respect of communities providing planning consent for the right development in the right places. I suppose the question is, do you agree?
I do agree, and as Neil may remember, and Tony, you may remember, so literally the first, or one of the very early projects Craig Streets did was trying to advance a community right to build order, and we discovered it's quite hard. Local development orders are also something that have not taken off. So I think there is an open question about within the legislation that follows from the white paper, and obviously Civic Voice have been doing work on this. Are the ways in which, in some areas where growth is going to be more advantaged, you could then have fast track mechanisms, within what's been pre-permitted within clearer local plans. Once you've got the right evidence base for that, is that going to be enough? I don't know the answer to that. But no, interestingly, actually, we've just been approached by a community group in Kent, keen to move forward a neighbourhood development order. And yeah, I don't know whether to be hopeful or concerned, really.
And the final one, which I suppose sort of summarises some of the concerns that were expressed at our last meeting about the planning white paper and whether the effect of it will be that neighbourhood planning is diminished and turned into just a design tool rather than a spatial planning tool. So what will happen to existing neighbourhood plans and all the policies that they contain? Will they be replaced by design codes, asks Janine Griffiths.
Again, I'm probably not the right person to fully answer that at this stage. I mean, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is going to take some years. It'll take a while for legislation to come forward. It'll take a while for it to move in. So yeah, I think no is the short answer. I think the pressure that you referenced, Tony, and that's implicit in the question, the ongoing spatial role of neighbourhood plans, I think, is something that is very important to hold on to. I don't think, again, I can only speak for myself. Certainly the intent from some of us advising on the white paper is not that should happen. It certainly wasn't the intent of B4C in any way. Clearly there will be a pressure. If there's a pressure for more development in some areas, which is a top-down pressure, I think that will create some tension. So I think there is more work and detail to be done on, how will the neighbourhood plan work in an area of growth or assertive regeneration. I think that's a legitimate and valid question that we need to work through. So all your questions are legitimate. I'm not implying that it's the first legitimate question.
I have a final one, which I have to ask because Angela's asked it, and I'll get muted if I don't ask it of you. How will we demonstrate viability in design codes?
Well, do we need to? Question mark. Because the whole point about viability, Angela, is the land price is uncertain because the planning clarity is so obscure. Now, so there will need to be ultimately some mechanism. You can't, design codes are by their nature external things. And one thing I should say about National Model Design Code, if you look at it carefully, it's I hope entirely an external thing. So you can't have a design code. There needs to be some sort of holding of the line for things that get ridiculous. There will have to be some line on that. And I think you can't be insisting on sort of platinum covered walls, single story in the middle of the town. There'll have to be some clear sense check. But other than that, the whole point is you're setting the land value, or you're setting it in a clearer carapace than is currently the case. So the nature of the viability discussion changes. You're right that there does, perhaps less viability, it's more common sense. There has to be a common sense, is this reasonable test of some sort, clearly. It's not quite the same question, because once you've got that in place, the developer or the homeowner, whoever it is who wants to try it on, it's going to be much harder for them to try it on. There'll need to be some sort of pressure cooker clause. There'll need to be some ways in which you can break a code or break the system, because there'll have to be some sort of give in the system. But the intention is, as in, as the sentence I read is, as I read the intention, as in much of the world, it's clearer what you can do most of the time. Good ordinary is more defined. Doesn't mean you can't do something that's out of the ordinary. You clearly want that process, but it'll become less normal because it's so much easier to do the ordinary quickly.
So you'll be able to
cost effectively.
You'll be able to specify in the design code things that cost a lot of money and expect them to happen, even if it's not going to, if it's going to have a negative impact on the viability of the
Well, there
scheme.
clearly has to be a limit to that, doesn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. So
so
not gold plated, but could be maybe.
Well, yeah, literally. Yeah. So yeah, that will have to be some. But I think it's less the viability; it's more reasonableness. So yeah, there will need to be a mechanism and some form of appeal on that. Clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's it. We'll pick up a couple of other questions in other ways. Nicholas, thank you very much for the both presentation, but also for opening yourself up to that line of questions.
I hope I've not created any hostages to fortune now. I wonder if I have. Well, thank you. They were good questions. Thank you all very much.
We really appreciate your time. We clearly all wish you well with the Office for Place and the offers there if Neighbourhood Planners.London can help in any way with the integration of your thinking and neighbourhood planning and what it can achieve, then you know, we're here to help.
Well, if I may, sorry, I know you're trying to move on to probably more interesting people, but if I can just actually pick you up on that for a second, Tony, and encourage both you, Neighbourhood Planning.London as an institution, but all any of you individually, you know, if you've got points you want to make, please do you know, feed them in. I apologise in advance if I don't reply individually to everything. I'm completely sort of swamped with stuff at the moment, but you know, I genuinely am, as I hope has become clear, a passionate fan of neighbourhood planning, both as what it is and also the concept behind it. So you know, please do. Thank you. Sorry,
yeah, appreciate that. And it's good to have your voice in those processes, you know, pushing what neighbourhood planning can do. So thanks again. Feel free to stay with us. Appreciate you've probably got 1,001 other things.
I'll listen in if I may. I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just pick up a couple of the other points that people were asking. So just Meenakshi Sharma, is neighbourhood planning only for the middle classes? Good question. I'll just point you to the work that we did as Neighbourhood Planners.London on neighbourhood planning in more deprived parts of London, which demonstrates that it doesn't have to be. But clearly there are reasons why perhaps it needs to be supported more if it's to be more egalitarian and more available to everyone. And Rich Clark's asked, welcome Rich, I think this is your first virtual gathering. If we're thinking about starting a neighbourhood plan, is it worth starting now or would it be better to wait until there is more certainty? There's no easy answer to that question other than the official guidance is keep going. There's no reason to be not pushing forward with a neighbourhood plan. That the inevitable uncertainty the planning white paper raised, and we discussed it at our last meeting, is no reason for not carrying on or not starting. And that there are a number of neighbourhood forums that they indicated at the beginning of the meeting who are looking at the first step towards applying, which is why it's so important that the designation process is as smooth and as sort of appropriate as possible, and people don't get put off at that stage. So, Angela, can we ask that question again?
Yes, please. Give me a second.
So we're just going to ask you the same question, just to see if it's anything that's been said in the last hour or so has made any difference. If people just want to respond, it's the same question that you had last time. And I think Angela's looking for a 90% response, aren't you?
Yes, and we are at about 50% already. We have still 82 people on the call.
That's
so
brilliant.
Yes, 67%. So as I said earlier, don't forget to press the button, submit your vote. Important. Another few seconds. Stalling at 77% currently.
Okay.
79.
Maybe we'll get to 80.
Can I just check? Can you see how this is actually moving forward? Yes.
No, I can't.
Okay, good. So there is actually informative value in me commenting on it.
There is.
Okay, good. I think we might want to call this now then.
Okay.
So we have
Let's do
80% return, and I shall end the vote now and share my results, our results.
63, 29.
Yeah.
So my memory is it was 53 yes before, 33 possibly, 7 no, and 7 I do not know what they are. So that's, well, read into that what you will, but that would seem to be a vote even more strongly in favour of the role that neighbourhood planning can play in design issues. So I suspect that's a result that Nicholas should be pleased with, given that we spent much of the last hour discussing precisely that. Great.
I think what he could take away as well is the first half of this question with the right support.
Indeed.
That's a really, really important part of, I believe, people being able and enabled to do this work in the future.
And Nicholas is both officially pleased and agrees on that point, Angela. Right, we're going to move on now. So we thought we should take this opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, there's a number of neighbourhood plans which have been caught by the fact we haven't been able to move to referendums during the last year or so. With a fair wind, that process is opening up again, and obviously everyone, I suspect, on the call is aware of the mayoral elections coming up. Well, the same process that governs those also governs things like neighbourhood planning. So we've got 4 quickfire presentations from the different parts of the city, all of whom are at that stage. So they know the order I'm going to call them. I'm going to ask if Nick Bailey first, from Fitzrovia West. So we're talking about just north of Oxford Street in the centre of London. Nick, if I think Angela will unmute you, and if you could fire away.
So Nick is unmuted. And Nick, if I find you on my screen, I will actually spotlight you, but please sort of crack on, basically.
I think I'm next to you, actually, but on my screen.
Yeah, they're all different, I'm afraid. This is a really funny jigsaw, basically. So okay. I shall spotlight you now. Here we go.
Right. Okay. Thanks so much. A very brief introduction, and I will attempt to answer the 3 questions that Tony asked us to address. Firstly, the introduction to the area. It's part of Westminster on the eastern boundary with Camden, and as Tony said, just north of Oxford Street, going up to, in a kind of triangle, up to the Marylebone Road in the north. So a very mixed area. Traditionally, a large number of small businesses, something like 2,000 odd small businesses in our area, and big businesses, of course, as well. And about 4,000 residents, with something like 25% in affordable or social housing. So it's a really very mixed area in terms of uses and population, with a wide range and very diverse population as well. The forum is into its second 5-year period of designation, and that makes you think a bit in terms of time. The preparation of the neighbourhood plan has speeded up a bit in the latter years, but I think I counted something like 17 drafts of the city of our neighbourhood plan which have been circulated for comments. And of course, you have to go through 2 rounds of consultation, one organised by us and one organised by the local authority. Westminster has something like 20 odd neighbourhood forums or community councils in its area, which is, I think, the number in London. And I noted that the report, I don't know who produced it, but it came from your organisation, identified Camden and Westminster as being 2 most supportive boroughs in terms of officer support in the preparation of neighbourhood plans. So we were grateful for a degree of support. A lot in the end depends on the officers that are we have direct contact with, but we, I think, have had quite a good degree of support. Very mixed areas, I said, 60 odd listed buildings, 5 conservation areas, a strategic view crossing us from Primrose Hill to Westminster to the parliamentary buildings, a mixture of, as I said, affordable housing, but also a lot of super prime, very expensive housing in the latter years, some of which is empty, and of course a large amount of Airbnb stroke private rented vacant property as well. So serious housing problems, and no open space. There is literally no public open space in the designated area. There's a few very small courtyards and private open spaces. So that's the area we were dealing with. We are in fact a business neighbourhood, so we have a mix of businesses and residents on the forum. 250 odd members actually signed up. And of course, we've done a vast amount of consultation over the years through public meetings where possible, and publicity in local papers. There's a community newspaper that circulates regularly, and blogs and all sorts of social media as well. So we've gone over the top in terms of the publicity. Point two, learning the lessons is interesting. It's really a long and very slow process. I think that's the best way of describing it, and almost like a process of attrition where we're proposing certain things, the local authority comes back and says, no, you can't do that, perhaps you could do this, and it goes backwards and forwards in all the various stages. Also, we'd found an enormous amount of evidence. The evidence base was by no means clear, and I hope if neighbourhood planning does go digital, a lot of this is actually going to be made available in an easy format by local authorities, because there are numerous policy papers, policy documents, special policy papers, all sorts of guidelines on roof extensions, tables and chairs on pavements, you name it. There's something written on it somewhere, and even the local authorities themselves don't always know what's available. And so really in our area, the problem is perhaps too much policy coming from the local authority and the London plan. And in many ways, the problem is a lack of implementation of these policies. If only the City of Westminster and the GLA actually implemented in detail what they actually say in their plans, we probably wouldn't need a neighbourhood plan. So we're kind of adding another layer of complexity in some ways at the lowest level. We've went through numerous drafts, as I said. We had responses from the City Council, which we took account of. You have to agree a statement of common ground, which then goes to the examiner, where you identify areas you're willing to concede, points you're willing to concede, and the local authority come back and say, you're still not conforming with our policy on X, Y, and Z. That goes off to the examiner with the documentation, and in fact we had a very good examination. We were pleasantly surprised with the response from the examiner, who was broadly very complimentary about what we'd done, and but she also broadly accepted the points made by the local authority. So in the end, the corners are knocked off. Any innovation or any originality is largely sort of watered down a bit by the policy response from the council. And what you end up doing, or what we ended up doing, was trying to accentuate the local interpretation of policies, how we'd want to see our policies interpreted in detail. Like, for example, with affordable housing, we'd want to see it actually built on the site in question, not as it often happens, where money is paid into an affordable housing budget, which the local authority then spends somewhere else. So we wanted to support the concept of mixed communities and diversity, and that included in the housing stock and on particular sites. And so whether we can actually achieve that remains to be seen. So that's really point two, I think, about the lessons learned. So it just takes time, and it's exhausting, and requires endless drafts and consultations, but in the end you get to the point where we've got to now, which is we're awaiting for a decision statement from the local authority. The report, they consider the examiner's report, and they come back with a final decision statement which says, we accept all the points from the examiner, but we want you to change A, B, and C, or we want you to revise this particular policy to bring it more into line with our strategic policy. And in the case of Westminster, almost everything appears to be a strategic policy. So even detailed guidance on car parking and planting trees and all the rest of it appears to be strategic in their interpretation. In terms of interesting policies, which is point 3, we accentuated the idea of greening our area through tree planting, but also we commissioned a consultant to produce a indicative study. So it wasn't really a set of detailed policies, but an indication as to how certain streets might be closed in order to increase the amount of open space and to improve the environmental quality of the area. The area, Fitzrovia, is a grid system basically of streets, all of which are used by vehicles, deliveries, and all the rest of it going up and down. Some of them are rat runs. So we wanted a kind of comprehensive review of how certain streets might be identified for closure in order to improve in the environmental quality. That was welcomed not least by Westminster City Council, but it was also welcomed by the examiner and is now one of the supporting documents which can be seen on our website, fitzwest.org. You will find all the documentation, and we were, surprised. We got some money from our ward councillors who have a they have an individual ward councillor budget, and they funded this study by a well-known consultant, which didn't take very long and was a very useful document in putting forward how the area might be in the future. Otherwise, we are aware of the changes to the planning system, permitted development, what I consider to be the kind of watering down of the local planning process in general, the increasing difficulty of local authorities to actually control development in their area. We have we had to completely change our retail policy. For example, we couldn't really protect local shops because you can't protect local shops under use class E because they can become almost anything else that anybody wants to do with them, or they can become residential as well. So certain areas just disappeared completely from our policy, and we ended up just accentuating the sort of design aspects, creating attractive street frontages, creating as far as possible a mixture of uses in our high streets. We couldn't focus particularly on retail. So that was really it. In the end, it becomes down, I think, to local politics, to ensuring that officers and members are aware of the neighbourhood plan policies and actually pay attention to them when they are considering applications. Too often, on grounds of time, a lack of resources, not wishing to generate costs awarded against them, local authorities push through all sorts of projects that really ought to be reconsidered or refused. So it becomes a process of lobbying and advocating the policies in the neighbourhood plan. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. That's really helpful and really clear. We're going to move north now into Camden to Nancy Mayo and Redington Frognal, or known to its friends as Red Frog, which is at a similar stage. Yeah,
I asked Nancy to unmute. She should be with us in a second.
I am. I'm here.
Wonderful.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
And Nancy, keep going. I'm just going to spotlight you so everybody can see you.
Okay. Well, our neighbourhood plan area is almost entirely a residential conservation area. It's about 1 square metre in size, no public space. It's very small. But the special architectural and historic interest is based on landscape infrastructure, which is influenced by garden suburbs with mature trees and hedges. Its townscape character, based on residential buildings set back behind small front gardens with low front walls and hedges. And it has Edwardian and Victorian architecture, often drawing on Queen Anne Revival and arts and crafts influences. And in addition, it has unique hydrogeology with many springs at the junction of Bagshot sand and London clay, producing much underground water. So it's quite unique, and the local plan policies and conservation area appraisals have failed to protect the area, and its character has been considerably eroded. Causes of harm are mainly tree felling to facilitate development, loss of gardens, including rear gardens, due to overlarge extensions, garden buildings, and large areas of hard surface, loss of front gardens to car parking, and infilling of gaps between houses. So the neighbourhood plan wanted to try and strengthen the protection for the area. And lessons from the journey to designation, from designation to referendum. All stages were very labour intensive and time consuming. The whole process has taken more than 6 years. It's been through 3 public consultations. Policy drafting was particularly problematic. And with the wisdom of hindsight, it would have been helpful if forum committee members had attended a workshop on policy drafting, including how to build on the policies of the local plan and the London plan. The plan health check that we were awarded was not particularly helpful, and the local authorities still didn't like the policies even after the health check. The plan was only saved through the use of a mediation package available through locality, which was incredibly helpful. The plan would not have achieved any of its aims without mediation. Professional input into policy drafting and mediation is imperative if neighbourhood plan policies are to achieve policies which are distinct from and build on the local plan. It seemed to us that really the local authority just wanted us to restate their own policies. And then about the evidence base, we have a massive evidence base of over 160 documents. We wanted to ensure that we were successful in the desire of the neighbourhood plan to halt the loss of trees, gardens, wildlife habitat and soil volumes. These goals were made possible by quantifying the losses and by mapping the underground rivers in the area. We commissioned bat surveys and undertook bird sightings and provided these to Green Space Information for Greater London, which mapped the local ecological network in order to demonstrate that cumulatively the gardens form a local ecological network. Losses of trees were quantified by Blue Sky International using aerial photography. Losses of gardens were mapped by Ordnance Survey. Other aims were to reduce the volume of soil lost to basement development, which was causing gardens to become effectively roof gardens with insufficient soil depth to sustain mature and large trees. And we also wanted to prevent the diversion of underground rivers through basement development. Although the development of the neighbourhood plan took far longer than anticipated, it would probably not have been possible to achieve the policies to benefit nature in the absence of the Environment Bill and Policy G5 of the new London plan. We also included design codes, which were drawn up by ACOM with input from Create Streets and Urban Vision, but the local authority didn't like these and they were relegated to guidance. That's it.
Brilliant. Nancy, thank you so much. That was really, really good. And some really interesting policies in there. Not sure how many others will have underground rivers to deal with, but I'm going to move now back down to near King's Cross. Christian Spencer Davis, if you're there, from Camley Street. Hi, Christian.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, Christian.
Hi. How you doing?
We're good. We're ready for you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I am representing Camley Street Neighbourhood Forum. I think Tony sent us a letter and the volunteers were asked to step forward and everybody else stood back except me. So here I am. Just to put a slight caveat here, I've not really been involved in the policy part of creating our neighbourhood plan. I've been sort of more tactical on the outside, but I have been involved in neighbourhood forum since the very beginning. To explain Camley Street, it's an area immediately behind King's Cross, so the south side of Camden Town, shall we say. It's understandably, what should we say, under threat, or there's an awful lot of change coming along in that neighbourhood. It's an island site. We originally started with a much wider neighbourhood plan area, but it became unmanageable. And so we trimmed our planned site to what is the boundary of a canal and a railway line and a road that is a complete story higher. So it basically makes a little island. Unusually, our site is almost exactly divided in half by Camley Street itself. And on one side is residential and with about 500 homes. So let's say 1,000 residents. And on the other side is industrial with about 500 employees. The key here is that the industrial side is almost completely up for redevelopment. It's all, well, predominantly owned by Camden Council. That's my introduction. To give you a very simple lesson from what we've done so far, it's been 8 or 9 years, and it is said quite often, it's a very long drag, and it's extremely bureaucratic and hard work, and you probably do need professional help all over the place. I think it's really important to know why you're doing it, to have a very strong reason. In our case, we're a threatened neighbourhood, should we say, so we had a reason to be active. Because over that period of time, people come and go, not due to lack of interest, but your life changes and you may move to different neighbourhoods or even different countries. So you have to have a reason to put up with the tiredness, the aggravation and the frustration to keep going to the end. Where we are exactly is, I think we passed the examination a year ago approximately, but it's been a funny year, so you lose track after that. So I believe it's effectively treated as if it has passed a referendum, just because it's not been possible in lockdown. We are expecting an actual referendum at the same time as the mayor's vote in a couple of months. Unusual features about Camley Street. The biggest thing about it is it's this industrial side of the street. So I feel with neighbourhood planning, industry doesn't really have a voice. I mean, you can include it in the neighbourhood planning group, but only residents are allowed to vote on anything. However, unusually, our team is almost exactly 50-50, understandably, and we've worked well together. We've got, let's think, well, the key features in our plan that I would say was probably highly unusual is we've managed to argue a high level of affordability to whatever happens in the future, much higher than the local authority would have liked. And it's been actually quite hard work. But then I think uniquely so far, a safeguard for existing employment. So typically in the world of development and planning, a building may change its occupation, and the argument might be, it's the same number of employees, nothing's changed. But whoever the original employees were, who knows where they moved on to, but it doesn't seem to count to anyone. So we've managed to get in the policy a safeguard of existing businesses, so they can't simply be swept away without any voice whatsoever. There's many caveats in there, unfortunately. So it's a long way to go, and we'll see what happens in the end. But a lot is going to change, and hopefully what we've created will give a little bit of a stronger voice to the people in the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Christian, thank you. That's really, really helpful. And yours is, again, has its own character, doesn't it? It's a very unusual area in many ways. We're now moving east to the Isle of Dogs, which has unusually been through 2 examinations, but successfully through its second one. Is it Ralph Hardwick?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi there.
Hi there.
Over to you.
Okay. Well, I recently took over the chair of the Isle of Dogs Forum. late last year because our original chair moved out of the area. But if I can just explain now where we are. If you drew a line or followed the line of the Jubilee line across Canary Wharf on the Isle of Dogs, but everything south of that except the Canary Wharf estate is part of our planning forum area. Most of the issues revolve around infrastructure, and with the many tall buildings that are being erected and continuing to be planned, we have a considerable number of infrastructure issues because many of them that are going up are car permit free. There's concerns over refuse, concerns over water supply, concerns over sewage. So we have sort of some of these issues that are identified in our plan. More recently, I'm not going to be, haven't got the prepared parts about where we did various items and our particular policies, etc. But we're now obviously spending time or focusing on getting our policy voted on in the upcoming elections. So we are looking at the moment of how best to broadcast our desires in the local environment. But obviously, as a result of the pandemic, some of these issues are difficult to achieve. So I really haven't got an awful lot more to say unless somebody's got any questions, I'm afraid.
That's fine. That's really helpful. Thank you. Actually, you mentioned the pandemic, and that's one of the, if I can ask questions of the four presenters, I think that's possible, isn't it, Angela? Suzanne Grocott, who's involved in the potential new Wimbledon forum, has asked precisely that question. If anyone would like to respond to how has the pandemic affected your plan? I don't know if, Christian, do you want to have a go?
Well, it's simply delay the vote. So the vote can't the election or referendum has not been allowed to be held, but it is going ahead very soon, finally.
Okay, other view, any other, Nick or Nancy or Chris?
Yeah, we've kind of carried on using Zoom meetings. We've had, I think, I'm trying to remember, at least one annual meeting on Zoom was quite successful. But fortunately, we had done the sort of primary consultation, the Regulation 14 and such like, before the pandemic struck, I think. We have yet to have a date given us for the referendum, so we're hoping it's going to be May, June, July, sometime after the restrictions are lifted, but that remains to be seen. Otherwise, we'll just have to blast everybody with social media and emails and such like. And one of the problems, of course, is to, in our case, we have two referendums, one for the residents and one for businesses. And the problem is locating the right person in each business who has the vote, because it's the person who pays the business rate, or doesn't pay the business rate at the moment because they don't have to, but the person who is in contact with the city council who has the vote, and it's really difficult at the moment to find out who that actually is, and therefore to get them to register for a postal vote and hopefully ensure they do. We've had the support of our bid, which is the New West End company, which has been surprisingly helpful actually in all sorts of ways, and they have part of their area covers the area just to the north of Oxford Street, and they will be they've offered assistance. They offered a person at one stage to help lobby local businesses and to use their mailing lists and such like. So hopefully in the next couple of months we'll have to get that going, and we'll be able to do it physically rather than by electronic means.
And Nancy, do you have any take on this?
Oh, well, the plan was delayed probably by about, well, more than half a year, because the Regulation 15 consultation, it was felt couldn't go ahead during the pandemic. But then government advice was issued to advise local authorities to continue
Yeah.
And then we lost time over examination, but the lost time was actually quite helpful because it meant that the evidence was constantly strengthening behind the policies, and Camden has been implementing the policies since the plan passed examination.
And do you so you don't have a date yet for your referendum?
Probably June.
June. So is anyone, maybe in the chat, just if anyone on the call has got a referendum date for a plan that they're aware of, which is earlier than June or even at the same time?
Ours is in May, the Isle of Dogs, at the same time as the mayoral elections.
Right, that's what I was going to ask. That's the earliest, isn't it? That we can have them.
I'm guessing so.
Right. Okay. So we've got, it sounds like you'll be having to campaign during still quite a bit of lockdown.
Yeah.
Whereas those which are June, July, you know, who knows, but there might be a little more freedom to do things.
Yeah, we're hoping to have be able to distribute some leaflets to the people who can vote on the plan, because there's obviously a number of issues in the area, because we've got the mayoral elections. I think we've got about 5 different voting elements to in the area.
And Ralph, can you, sorry if this is a trick question, but can you remember what the population is in your neighbourhood area?
I think we're looking at about 25,000 off the top of my head.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of big development, really, haven't you?
Well, yes, I mean, one of the famous one at the moment is the one Mr. Generic approved and then had to backtrack on. That is now going back to a new planning inspectorate appeal, which is coming up in the next couple of months or so.
Yes, so while some people are worrying about 6 stories.
Yes. Well, I mean, the actual, if it would be, if people who are on here came to look at what is happening in our particular area, they would be absolutely astonished about the development, the number of towers, and it's just continuing all the time. More and more plans keep coming forward to sort of build another 50 or 60-story tower on, you know, no more than a tennis court size plan.
May I, sorry, Tony, if I want to say something here. Ralph, it would be really great to get your perspective on this very hot discussion on design codes and design quality, in sort of knowing, you know, your issues are really quite on a different scale, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm fully. It's been messed about with so much already. The various designs of buildings. I think one of the Lincoln Plaza, which was I think is probably a 40-story development, got given the Carbuncle of the Year award. And we got quite a number of buildings that are quite bland. And it's very difficult to actually have a design code that would work for the type of area we are in, because there's so many different structures that have gone up that are completely diverse in terms of their design. So in terms of trying to look for some cohesion on a design code, it's very difficult to do so. I mean, at one point during the planning process, it was, if anybody went above the 1,100 habitable rooms per hectare number, then it would have to be some, I think it was exemplary design. But it's just, I mean, we've got a number of places that are 5 times that density. Yeah. So, yeah, it's mind-boggling, basically.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else anyone wants to say from any of the 4 forums? Because I'm going to draw things to a close. Thanks very much, all of you, for that. And I'm sure you've all got our best wishes for a smooth process from here on in to whenever your referendum date is. Sounds like July might be the latest, but still no confirmation of dates for some of you. And there's, I think, 5 other forums that I'm aware of that are in a similar position. and there's another 2 or 3 that are sort of approaching or at examination. So there's going to be a flurry with a fair wind of new neighbourhood plans made in London over the next few months. And I was taken by just, once again, I mean, one of the things about neighbourhood plans is the ability to sort of bring innovative policies and fresh thinking, whether it be the scale of development that you're dealing with, Ralph, which is at a sort of a continental scale in terms of the amount. It's more than being the biggest development in the UK. The sort of approach to safeguarding existing employment uses, the protection for underground rivers, and the ability to carve out new open space and green spaces from streets. Just examples, I think, of the ingenuity, but also the priorities that communities are bringing to their areas. So thank you. Thanks everyone on the call. We'll stay in touch. If you've got any feedback on today's event, then please do feed it in. So unless, Angela, you've got anything else you want to say, I'll draw a line and thank everyone for coming.